The truth is finally about to be revealed to the world. Are you ready for the ultimate confrontation between past and present? Click subscribe now and don't miss a single beat of this heart-pounding and intense cinematic experience. The night my mother-in-law introduced me as the help to a table full of my husband's business partners, I was wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly rent. It never had. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old. I hold a master's degree in structural engineering, and for 11 years I quietly built a consulting firm that now employs 47 people across 3 states. I also spent 7 of those years married to a man who let his mother treat me like furniture present, useful, and entirely beneath notice. I want to tell you how that ended. But to understand the ending, you need to understand how it began. I met my husband, Daniel, at a conference in Chicago. He was charming, quick-witted, and introduced me to his colleagues that evening as the smartest person in the room. I believed that version of him for a long time. Longer than I should have. His mother, Margaret, lived 40 minutes from our house in Scottsdale. What she actually was a woman who had married well twice, outlived one husband, divorced the other, and now wielded her address book like a weapon. She had opinions about everything: what Daniel should eat, where we should vacation, whether my firm was a real business or more of a hobby. She delivered these opinions with a smile so practiced it looked natural. The first time she called me the help, it was an accident. Or so she claimed. We were at a dinner party at her house, 12 guests, catered, linen napkins. One of her friends, a woman named Patricia, asked who had arranged the flower centerpieces. Margaret glanced at me and said, casually, "Oh, I had someone come in." Patricia looked at me. I looked at Margaret. Margaret took a sip of her wine. Daniel laughed it off later. She just misspoke. You know how she is. I did know how she was. That was the problem. Over the years, the pattern repeated in small ways that were easy to dismiss individually but impossible to ignore collectively. She never used my name in front of her friends. She referred to my firm as Claire's little project. Once, when Daniel and I arrived at a charity luncheon she was hosting, she handed me a stack of programs at the door and told me to distribute them to the guests. Daniel was already across the room kissing cheeks before he noticed. He noticed, smiled apologetically, and said nothing. I distributed the programs. I tell you this not to paint myself as a victim but because the question I know you're already asking, why did you stay silent so long, deserves an honest answer. I stayed because I loved my husband, or the man I believed him to be. I stayed because I was building something professionally that required every ounce of my energy, and I did not have enough left over to also fight a war at home. And I stayed because I kept thinking I was wrong about how bad it was. I was not wrong. The moment I finally knew the way you know, in your bones, with no room left for rationalization, came on an ordinary Tuesday. I came home from a long day to find Margaret sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of my coffee and a folder on the counter between her and Daniel. They both looked up with the particular expression people wear when they've been talking about you. We were just discussing the Henderson Gala, Daniel said. The Henderson Gala. Let me explain what that was. Richard Henderson was a developer, old money with new ambitions. The kind of man who built luxury resorts and named conference rooms after himself. He was also the single largest potential client my firm had ever pursued. For 8 months, I had been methodically cultivating a relationship with his team, presenting proposals, answering every technical question with precision. We were close. I could feel it. The Henderson family hosted an annual gala every October at their estate in Paradise Valley. It was industry royalty, architects, developers, city planners. Getting an invitation was its own validation. I had received one, by name, 6 weeks earlier. Daniel and I were both invited. Separately, my name on my invitation, his on his. That was the first unusual detail I had filed away without examining too carefully. Margaret has been asked to help coordinate the guest experience at the gala, Daniel said. She'll be working with the Henderson family's event team. I looked at my mother-in-law. She smiled at her coffee cup. That's wonderful, I said, because I didn't yet understand what it meant. I understood 3 weeks later when I arrived at the Henderson estate on a warm October evening in a black column dress, my hair up, a portfolio of project renderings in a slim leather case. I had prepared. I had talked to Richard Henderson's chief of staff twice that week. I was ready. A woman at the entrance checked my name against a list and handed me a laminated badge on a lanyard. Event staff often wore badges. I assumed it was standard. I didn't look at it until I was inside. Vendor liaison catering support. I stood in the marble foyer of the Henderson estate with 300 guests around me and read those 4 words twice. Then I looked up and found my mother-in-law across the room, watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not the practiced social smile. Something older and more satisfied. Beside her stood Daniel, laughing at something Richard Henderson's wife had just said, a glass of champagne in his hand, not looking at me at all. I want to tell you I immediately walked over and confronted them. I want to tell you I ripped the badge off, set it on a silver tray, and delivered some perfectly calibrated speech. That is not what happened. What happened is that I stood very still for approximately 30 seconds and made a decision. I put the badge in my purse. Then I walked into the gala. I want to be precise about what I understood in that moment, because it matters. I understood that this had been planned. The separate invitations, Margaret's sudden involvement with the Henderson event team, the badge with its specific and humiliating designation. This was not a mistake or a miscommunication. Someone had called the Henderson family's event coordinator and given them information about me. Someone had arranged for my professional identity to be quietly erased before I could walk through the door. I also understood that no one in that room yet knew what had just happened except the people who had arranged it. That was an advantage. And I intended to use it. I found Richard Henderson's chief of staff, a methodical woman named Susan Cho, near the bar. Susan and I had spoken on the phone twice that week. She knew my name, my work, my proposals. She greeted me warmly, which told me she was not part of whatever Margaret had arranged. I wanted to confirm our conversation with Richard is still on for this evening, I said. Absolutely, Susan said. He's looking forward to it. He read the updated seismic analysis you sent Thursday. He had questions. Good questions, I hoped, I told her. The best kind. Over the next 40 minutes I moved through that room the way I had learned to move through difficult terrain steadily, observantly, without urgency. I spoke to 3 city planning officials, 2 of whom had worked with my firm previously. I had a 15-minute conversation with a structural engineer from Phoenix who had been trying to get a meeting with me for months. I collected 2 business cards from people I had not expected to meet. Daniel found me near the garden doors at the 1-hour mark. I didn't know you were here, he said. And something about the slight miscalculation in his voice told me he had expected me to leave. I was invited, I said. He glanced at my neckline, where the badge wasn't. Did you? Get a drink with me, I said. We stood at the bar and I looked at my husband's profile, the jaw I had once found reassuring. The careful way he held himself at events like this, and I thought about 11 years. I thought about the programs at the door, and the flower centerpieces and Claire's little project and 100 other moments I had metabolized quietly and moved past. How long has your mother been working with the Henderson event team? I asked. A few weeks. She knows someone on the committee. And whose idea was the badge? A pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is a long time when you've been married to someone for 7 years, and you know exactly how long it takes them to construct a comfortable answer. There must have been a mix-up with Daniel. I turned to look at him. I have been building a relationship with this family for 8 months. This is the most important professional event of my year. And I walked in with a badge that said catering support. I kept my voice low and entirely level. Whose idea was it? He looked at his champagne glass. I left him at the bar. Richard Henderson was a large man with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never had to fight for a room's attention. I had met him twice before briefly, at industry events where we had exchanged exactly enough words for me to know that he valued precision and disliked performance. He was standing near the fireplace when Susan brought me over, and he extended his hand immediately. Miss Claire, he said. I have your firm's Phase 2 analysis on my desk. The load distribution modeling on the South Tower. I want to understand your assumptions. We talked for 22 minutes. I know because I checked my watch afterward. He asked good questions. I had better answers. By the end, he had called over his lead architect and his head of development and introduced me to both of them, by name, as the engineer behind the Meridian Bridge retrofit you've been reading about. I thanked him. I meant it. Across the room, my mother-in-law was watching. What I did not know that evening, what I would only learn in the days that followed, was that the badge had not been the full extent of the plan. I learned this from an unlikely source. Daniel's assistant, a young woman named Priya who had worked for him for 3 years, and who texted me 2 days after the gala with a message that said simply, "I need to tell you something. Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop in Tempe on a Wednesday morning. Priya was 26, professional, visibly uncomfortable. She ordered a tea she didn't drink. What she told me was this. For approximately 14 months, Daniel had been redirecting a portion of operational invoices from his family's real estate management company through a separate account. The real estate management company had been partly capitalized, 9 years earlier, with $340,000 from my personal savings money I had earned before our marriage and contributed as a loan, documented, with a repayment agreement that had never been honored. The redirected funds totaled, by Priya's estimate, somewhere between $180,000 and $220,000. She had seen the transfers. She had records. She also told me that Margaret had been present for at least 2 conversations in which the strategy was discussed. And that Daniel had recently begun meeting privately with a divorce attorney. I sat with this information for approximately 4 seconds. Then I asked Priya if she would be willing to share what she knew with my attorney. She said yes. I want to pause here on the question I know some of you are asking. Why hadn't I seen this? I am a detail-oriented person. I run a firm. I read contracts. The honest answer is that I had seen edges of it, invoices that didn't quite add up. A refinancing of the management company I hadn't been fully briefed on, and I had accepted Daniel's explanations because I had wanted to. That is the particular arithmetic of trust. You subtract the things that don't fit because the alternative math is unbearable. I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name is Rachel, and she has the steady effect of someone who has heard everything and is surprised by very little. I told her what Priya had told me. I mentioned the unpaid loan. I mentioned that Daniel had already consulted a divorce attorney. Forward me everything Priya can provide, Rachel said. And don't move any money, don't change any accounts, and don't tell Daniel anything. I did not tell Daniel anything. Over the next 3 weeks, Rachel worked. A forensic accountant she engaged found $204,000 in redirected funds. The original $340,000 loan had accrued interest 9 years of it. There was also the matter of my name appearing as a silent investor on 2 of the management company's properties, an arrangement I had never signed off on and which had certain implications for how those assets would be treated in a divorce proceeding. Daniel filed first. He did it on a Friday, which I suspected was deliberate design to give me a difficult weekend before I could reach my attorney. What he did not know was that Rachel had been preparing our response for 2 weeks. He also did not know about the forensic accountant's report, or about Priya, or about the fact that I had spent a quiet Thursday afternoon at a title company signing papers on a property I had purchased 6 months earlier with money from an account. Daniel had no knowledge of a small but precise piece of financial foresight that would matter more than I could have anticipated. The property was a commercial event space in Scottsdale. A beautiful one-converted warehouse, 16-foot ceilings, a courtyard with olive trees. I had bought it as an investment, or so I had told myself. Looking back, I think some part of me had understood earlier than my conscious mind admitted that I was going to need a foundation that was entirely my own. The Henderson contract came through on the same Tuesday that Daniel's attorney contacted Rachel about asset division. It was the largest single contract in my firm's history. I did not tell Daniel. The divorce proceeded. These things take time, and I will not pretend it was clean or painless. There were difficult conversations and difficult silences and a period of approximately 6 weeks, where I came home to a house that felt like a stage set for a life I was no longer performing. But Rachel was precise and relentless, and the forensic accountant's report was damning, and what had been designed to be a quick, clean exit for Daniel became something considerably more complicated. The $340,000 loan, with 9 years of interest, was acknowledged. The $204,000 in redirected funds was addressed. My name on those two properties meant I was entitled to a portion of their appreciated value. The final settlement was not what Daniel had planned for when he quietly consulted that divorce attorney. Margaret was not a party to the divorce proceedings, but she was not untouched by them. The forensic accountant's report had documented her presence in the financial conversations clearly enough that her attorney quietly advised her, I was told secondhand, to return a sum she had received from Daniel's account over an 18-month period. I was told she complied without public dispute. I heard she called it a misunderstanding. The event space in Scottsdale opened in the spring. I hosted my firm's 10-year anniversary celebration, their 47 employees and their families, string lights in the courtyard, a caterer I had chosen myself. At the entrance I had a small table with name badges. Elegant ones, with each person's name in clean serif font. Mine said Claire, owner. 3 months later, the Henderson family hosted a site celebration for the groundbreaking of their new resort tower, the one my firm had designed the structural framework for. It was held at an event venue in Paradise Valley. Not the Henderson estate this time. My event space. Richard Henderson had called me directly to ask if it was available. I had quoted him a fair price. We shook hands on it the following week. I was standing in my own courtyard, under my own olive trees, watching cranes lift steel into a desert sky that turned gold at 6 in the evening, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. It was Zoe, Daniel's younger sister, who had always been peripheral to the family's dynamics, a quiet presence I had genuinely liked and lost along with everything else when the marriage ended. I just wanted to tell you, she said, without preamble, that I'm sorry. For not saying something sooner. For all of it. I stood in the courtyard for a moment before I answered. The crane operator above us was positioning a beam, and there was something clarifying about watching that, the precision of it, the weight of it, the way a structure only holds if every element is correctly placed. I appreciate that, I told her. And I did. What I want you to take from this, if you're standing somewhere quiet right now, reading the badge someone else put on you and wondering how you got here, is that the thing they use to diminish you is not the final word on who you are. They called me catering support in a room where I was the most qualified engineer present. They planned it carefully, they expected it to work. It didn't work because I didn't let it define me in that moment. Not the badge, not the smirk, not the 2-second pause before my husband's constructed answer. I took the badge off and put it in my purse, and I walked into the room I had earned the right to be in. You don't have to announce your value to people who have already decided not to see it. You just have to keep building what you know is real. The structure holds if you put the right things in the right places. I know that now better than I know almost anything. The courtyard is full of people tonight. The cranes are quiet. The steel is where it needs to be. And my name, for the first time in a long time, is on the door.